sister, come on. Take a knee, he believes in you. You got it. You got it. All right? Yo, thank you for supporting us. We got to continue supporting each other. That's how we start. Now you got to continue marching with us. We don't know how to organize. That's why all this is happening. We don't know how to organize. Help us.
What is the hobby?
It means that the people who live in New York want New York to end the violence, get the insurance here, and give us back our city.
How do you feel? Really emotional.
Feel fine. I feel fine. That's right. Because that's the first moment that we get this together. That us and everything that these cops have given their blood for, and the communities that we serve and they all love, can go back together and get those groups out of here from California, from all over this country, who are being paid to take this movement, which is a good movement, and turn it into violence against the men and women who love the communities. Yeah. Get them out of here, throw them out of your protests, protest peacefully. Why would anyone break into a store in your neighborhood? Places that employ the people in this neighborhood. No reason for it. It has to end. Let New York show the country how this is done.
Yeah. I saw you and the man hugged in tears. What do those tears represent?
It means we've had 5 days of war here that needs to end. It has to end today. Tonight, when that sun goes down, peaceful protesters go home. Leave it out to those who want to cause damage, and we'll get rid of them. We'll get rid of those that are ruining your neighborhoods. Be good.
Welcome to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. The police have been put in an impossible position to try and right every social wrong in the country caused by the economic, behavioral, and structural violence people experience daily. Many well-meaning individuals choose to become police officers and serve with the best of intentions, but they quickly become enmeshed in America's unfinished political, class, and race struggles, whether they like it or not. The police historically have been used to support the interests of rich and powerful elites in America. Yet every day, ordinary people are told they're needed to protect them and keep them safe. Since the first slaves arrived in 1619, to the Civil War, and through the years after Reconstruction, from America's Industrial Revolution in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and continuing on to World War II, America found ways to create a forced labor force and criminalize Black, poor, and immigrant lives in all kinds of ways. By the 1970s and 80s, a racist drug war and use of prison labor as a form of slave labor through mass incarceration recriminalized Black life. In the half millennium of living in America, the Black masses have experienced perhaps 3 or 4 decades of a limited degree of freedom. The paramilitary confrontational approach of the police and criminal justice system made sure of that. For many, the experience of American policing has been one of a continuous scandal of cops gone wild. Even with a broad-based anti-racist social justice movement developing, it will be no small trick to transform America's punitive police past and present. Our guest today on the Radical Imagination is Leo Lungaro, a widely decorated former sergeant and detective with over 20 years of service in the NYPD. He's the author of 3-0, The Dirty 30. It's the true story of the longest and largest police corruption scandal in New York City's history that led to the arrest of 33 police officers in the 30th Police Precinct in West Harlem during the early 1990s. Charges included robbery, extortion, civil rights conspiracy, assault, narcotics distribution, grand larceny, tax evasion, and perjury. The NYPD created a specialized unit to work directly with the community to regain their trust. And Sergeant Lungaro led that group in the first ever proactive police unit designed to combat crime and illegal drug dealing. So, Leo, thank you so very much for being here. That's quite a resume and quite a struggle you were involved in. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have you, and I'm so glad to talk with you about this fascinating new book.
Thank you.
So bring our audience up to date, our New York audience and around the country. What was going on?
Before I went to the 30th precinct, when I was first promoted to sergeant, I was at the 32nd precinct. And I was supposed to be going to the 23rd precinct. And at the last minute, they decided to change my orders from the 23rd precinct to the 30th precinct, which I wasn't happy about. The captain and a driver came and picked me up at the 32nd precinct, told me there's a change of plans, and I was going to the 3-0 and not the 2-3, which we went back and forth in words and everything else. But I kind of know you have to follow orders. So, I was going to the 3-0, and at the same time, he told me I was going to be in charge of this new unit called CPU. And I was like, what's a CPU? He goes, Community Policing Unit. They're going to make CPOP, which is originally called Community Program Operations, Community Policing Operations Program, and make it from a program into a real unit, just so to make it more serious. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. And he goes, well, you're going to be in charge of beat officers, community meetings, narcotics, club meetings, youth programs, everything. And I was like, how, I don't get to how am I going to do all this work? Just one person.
Right.
So I ended up going to the 3-0. And at the time I was on patrol at first, and I really didn't want to go community policing unit because eventually I was going to go back to the detective bureau, and I was supposed to go back after a year. And in my mind, if I end up being supervisor of community policing unit, I'm going to be there for a few years. And my plan was to go back to the detective bureau. The captain came up to me, the inspector came up to me when I said, sir, I'm really not interested in community policing. He goes, well, either you could do it, volunteer and do it, and I'll take care of you, or you can say you're not going to do it and you're going to do it anyhow, and we're not going to take care of you. So my hands are kind of tied. And just to backtrack a little bit too, the 3-0, the reason why I wanted the 3-0 to come out, and originally we were going to call it Dirty 30, but when I started writing the Dirty 30, the Dirty 30, the 3-0, the book, is not just about corruption. The corruption's in my book, but it's more about, I wanted the story to get out there. And who better than somebody who has a front row seat? And the other thing too is I wanted people to understand that police officers are human beings. They go out day in and day out doing their job. They're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, especially in 3-0. These 3-0 cops, the good ones, the good guys, were warriors. And we went through 5 suicides, 2 near suicides, all in a short period of time. And the other reason is even during trying times at the 3-0 and this corruption and all this crime, community policing can work if you do it the right way. It's interesting. I was watching your episode the other day with the NYPD 12. And I remember the one thing all those cops had, they were talking about was community policing, and how after 2010 or whatever it was, they all said, oh, we're all doing community policing. And they all said, what community policing? Because there is no community policing today. They had it in the early 90s and it worked.
Nice. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. So you entered into police service with the idea of becoming a detective, and right. So your orientation, you were there. You saw yourself as what? As somebody who was going in and protecting the community, serving them, rooting out the bad guys, doing your best to clean up the community, to clean up the bad guys from the community. That was your goal, right? That was your orientation as you first started, correct? Or
I mean, that's a loaded question. Going back, you know, before I was a detective, I worked in the 34th precinct. And when we were in the academy, and especially when we hit the streets, we were drilled into community policing. Get out of your car, walk the beat, meet the store owners, meet the people who actually live there.
Right.
These are the people we work for because we serve the community. The police serve the community. The community doesn't serve the police.
Right.
So our job is to really serve the community, know who's good and who's bad. So when you have that trust with the community and people start talking to you, you really know who the really bad guys are. So you zero in on the bad guys, you know, but you also know who the good guys are. So there's no conflict of interest. So if you're going back to my detectives days when I worked in narcotics, we would receive complaints about narcotics. We would do a complete investigation. We would make sure the dealing in weight. You know, it's not a, it's not like you go out there and, oh, okay, let's lock this guy up. No, it's like you watch the streets, whether you're on the rooftops or in an apartment building looking out the windows or in a surveillance van. You're seeing who's good, who's bad, who has the guns, you know, who has the drugs, who's exchanging the drugs. So it's not just something you're going out in the street and say, oh, you know, let me grab you and, you know, throw you up against the wall just because I'm here. No, when we go to the location, we already identified all the players.
Gosh, your answer raises so many questions in my mind. I'm just the last couple of days, just in the New York Times alone, lead op-eds on the. Here's one Monday. Police don't know enough about teenagers. When officers treated young people differently, they fared better. So here's another one. Moving beyond the war on drugs. The subway crime problem won't fix itself. Let me start by asking you this. Did you feel perhaps overwhelmed? It was unfair to ask the police to do so much? Were you asked to do so much, do you think, trying to right, as I said in the opening, right past wrongs or present wrongs?
I'm trying to figure out were they recent articles or are they?
Yeah, this is like today and yesterday, a couple of days ago. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What I think is interesting, and I hope this answers your question.
Sure.
And again, I'm going back to the NYPD 12 and crime and punishment and everything else. I can't speak for today's police department. I'm in LA. I really don't follow the news in New York anymore.
But you have our police chief. You had our police chief went out there, right? Bratton. Did he not try and incorporate some of the things he?
This is the point I'm trying to make. I was pre-Comstat.
Okay.
Okay. So Bratton came in, I believe, with Giuliani in 1994.
Right.
The 3-0 was going on probably between 89, 94 when they actually placed the officers under arrest. I believe it was the first year of Bratton's first term as commissioner. Right. So it took them a while to start, however they're going to train, Bratton was going to train these officers for Comstat. I don't know, because that was the end of my career. But I can only talk about beforehand. I didn't feel there's a lot of danger. There's 2,000 homicides a year.
Right.
But I didn't feel the pressure from the police department because I felt like I didn't want to miss a day of work. I felt I was having, for lack of a better word, fun. The police department was fun. We were going out and dealing with the community and everything else. And going back now, the second part, when you're talking about the Comstat, when I'm watching the NYPD 12, I almost said blue, NYPD 12, first of all, it was disturbing. And there's always two sides, but I know I zeroed in on two detectives. And I thought they were telling the truth. And one had over 20 years, he retired. And I think he was at the end of the prior police academy and street training where they were talking about community policing, because you saw in the segment where he went out, and I don't know if it was the film, I think it was a film, where he actually went out and he was talking to people, shaking hands, diffusing a situation, talking to the store owners, talking to the kids on the street.
Yeah.
That's the police department I remember.
I got you. Okay, so
So that's what I'm trying to explain. So I think there's a little confusion. You know, thank God I watched the NYPD 12, which is a fantastic episode.
Crime plus punishment. That's
Thank you for that. And Crime and Punishment, I thought was, you know, disturbing, but I only watched the first half. And I thought it was very, you know, it made me think a lot, but it also made me think about what you brought up a couple of times in the episode about, you know, Comstat, you know, and the numbers that Comstat went in, that they're trying to make NYPD into a business instead of, you know, the police serving the community. And that's what I got out of it. So I hope that answered.
That was in part because what the documentary was also trying to show how there still was this illegal quota system, and the police were put in positions where they really had to find someone to give some sort of summons and arrest. I mean, did you find that to be the case when you were again in the 30th precinct?
Well, and you know what, you're making a lot of great points, and I'm glad that you're bringing up, you know, broken windows, Comstat, and all this other stuff. Which, you know, again, this is after me. You know, crime was rampant in the early '90s. Something had to be done, but they should never got away from community policing. Now, going back to quotas and productivity, whatever the hell you want to call it, the beauty of me working in 3-4, the 3-2, the 3-0, there's so much crime, and you have people calling up all the time and saying, hey, listen, you know, I can't get to work today. Somebody's double parked, you know, in front of my car. So now we show up, and of course you're giving tickets, you know, whatever it is. But there was never a mention, because we were so active and doing our job and giving, you know, let's say, you know, okay, let's put, for instance, a 3-0. You know that there's, you know, a street with selling all drugs and everything else. Now everybody's double parked, triple parked. Nobody can get down the block. You're getting phone calls. Hey, listen, this is what's going on. Sarge, can, you know, come down, do something about it. So now we go out and give tickets and everything else. So there was never a mention of, you know, oh, you don't have enough numbers, because obviously the numbers were out of sight. If somebody wasn't doing their job, then, you know, the captain would call them in, but everybody in my team they were doing the job. So there was no talk about, oh, you gotta, you know, let's have these numbers or have that numbers. And the other thing that really amazed me, and again, watching the NYPD 12, is when, I forget which officer it was, when he's talking about C summonses. Now, back in the day, we, you know, cops have activity reports that they hand in every month. There was never C summons caption on there. And when he said that, you know, they have this quota for C summonses, and he goes, what am I going to do? Give this old man, you know, who's playing dominoes next to a bodega, C summons? That's wrong. How's that part of the community? You got to know community policing. And not to get off track, but the other thing I remember, I think it was NYPD 12, was there was a scene in a room where cops and civilians were talking and everything, you know, which was fantastic. And, you know, to vent out.
Right.
The thing with community policing that I was a part of, it's good that people vent out. When I had my community meetings, especially in the beginning, when I first took over the CPU program in the 3-0, yeah, they screamed and yelled at me. I mean, you know, they didn't have a voice for God knows how many years.
Right.
But to prove yourself as a cop, you have to go out in the street, walk that beat, talk to the store owners, talk to the people. When there's, you know, kids are going to school, you stand in front of the building or the subway station so they see your face. And with time, they start trusting you. But you can't just go up to somebody, oh, hey, you know, trust me, you know. I don't trust people if they trust me.
Lee, I have to tell you, because I did talk to Manny Gomez, who was the prime investigator in that documentary. He was also an NYPD police officer as well, as well as in Iraq as special service and so on. He agrees with you on that. He said the police need to be out there in the street, walking around, getting to know people. So this is 2021. I do want to ask you a couple of things too. Did you feel a little like a Serpico, sort of investigating or looking at what was going on in your own precinct there? And secondly, what did you think? That was also the height of the drug war, right? What did you think about that? And did you think that calls for the decriminalization of drugs now is more the route to go, so the police aren't put in these positions?
Well, first of all, I'm no Serpico.
No. Okay.
By far, no Serpico. My job, because it was so crazy, and if you read the book, I went through a lot of anxiety, a lot of panic attacks, mostly, because it was just too much. There's only so many people you to help at one time, and then you want to protect these cops, and then you're going through the 5 suicides or 2 near suicides. My personal opinion, you need criminal justice reform, without a doubt. A part of me said, just off the top of my mind right now, I don't think people who are using drugs should be going to jail. Maybe, if they get arrested, you send them to a rehab house or, rehabilitation to get help. Sending them to jail is not going to help them, because once they get out, they're going to use again. Definitely go after the big guys. Let the politics dictate how they want to handle that. But at the height, the beauty, when I went to the 3-0, I went quick, kicking and screaming, right? And my first reaction, I remember telling, the captain was like, I don't want to go to a hellhole. Are you kidding me? And when I left, during the 3-0, and when I left the 3-0, it was a miracle, because when every cop goes into the police academy, they want to help people. They want to protect, they want to help. They want to help the kids, they want to help the senior citizens, they want to help all the citizens of New York. And when I left, that community gave me a blessing. And when I met the one lady, probably about 3 years ago, when I was researching to do this book, and I asked if she remembered me. I didn't think, I said, oh my God, I'm walking up to this lady from, God knows how many years ago. How is she even going to remember me? And I would feel like an idiot if she didn't. And her eyes opened up wide, and I said, oh, you know who I am? And she goes, yeah, you're Sergeant Lungaro. You promised us change, you gave us change. And you still got some of these idiots down the street here, but nothing like it was before. And she gave me a hug, and I had a tear in my eye. And that was a blessing, because it validated my whole career, and you can't give anybody that much money in the world to have that gift. So, going back to saying all the drugs and out in the streets, and the 3-0 was crazy. But the beauty of the 3-0 too was you knew who the drug dealers were, because a lot of them didn't even live in the neighborhood. They lived in, Upper Washington Heights, the Bronx, Brooklyn. But the beauty of community policing is you knew who the good person is, because you know who lived on that block. So you could, it's like the officer who was a detective who retired after 20 years. When you know that, you could diffuse a situation. If you don't know the person, then all of a sudden, most likely there's going to be an arrest or something. I don't know, Right. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It raises other feelings that I just had too as you were talking. I think you put it so profoundly and wonderfully. Very moved by the pressure you felt of all these different forces around you, because you became the leader of this group in response to the 33 officers. So, and you were trying to understand what happened there. You had community responsibilities as well to do right by them. And I think as we move on to still, as we have this debate in this country, dialogue, but what the role of policing should be, I think what you've just said, it's got to be really also part of that debate and dialogue, that there are really good people trying to go into this work, and with the best of intentions. Let me just say, I mentioned, I inadvertently said you were in the 28th precinct. So the funny thing is, like, okay, so you were doing what you were doing in the early 90s. Now I became involved in a protest and subsequent trial in 2011 in the 28th precinct, where we protested there. So that's about 25 blocks south. You're on what was 151st Street was the 30th precinct?
Yeah, on the west side.
On the west side. So the 28th precinct was 123rd Street, Frederick Douglass Boulevard.
Yeah.
But long story short, as we got, and this was protesting what we felt were the abuses of stop and frisk, the community facing us as we got arrested came up to us and thanked us for the service we were doing for the community. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So the community, what am I trying to say here? That you're involved in the community as much as we try to be and do right by them. And the other thing you brought out is the political waves of the ups and downs of what the politicians think the public wants and doesn't want becomes so important in the way in which your role comes to be drawn out. So the whole idea behind community policing is in part a political decision.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah. So, and I again, as you look around with various other political movements, the defund the police movement, how do you respond or see that in relationship to the experiences you had in the early 90s? So resources would be directed more in terms of economic, jobs, mental health workers, taking over perhaps some of the roles that the police are asked to do in dealing with highly disturbed people. What is your response to some of the movements like Black Lives Matter and the defund program, to what you were about back in the early 90s?
Well, in the early 90s, we never really, went through any of this. And the only thing I could say, looking at today, I love being a police officer, and I think all police officers are heroes, and especially in the 3-0, going through those 33 officers being arrested. They were warriors. But going back to your original thing, I don't understand today's politics. And I would rather have people who are experts and very smart determine what the right thing to do is, and not just to base a decision on politics. And I believe in all protest. I think, but I'm not in the middle of it, so, and I'm not an expert in it. So I don't know, what are you defunding and where are you putting the money towards? And if experts agree, or sociologists, criminologists like you agree, oh, this is the right thing to do, well, then fine, by all means, do it. But they really have to, in my heart, in my mind, you have to go back to real community policing and doing it right to get the trust of the people. And that's the only way you're going to start changing things, is by having communication. Right now, they have miscommunication. And somehow they have to find a way to communicate with each other. And the only way to do that, and I'm sure the police officers, especially in the NYPD, would love to go out on a beat and start talking to the people. It's not going to be easy at first.
Yeah.
But, it's funny because my wife is from Washington Heights. Her family, her friends, everybody knew their beat officer back in the 80s, late 80s, and it was such a good feeling because he would watch out for them. and they would give him information and everything else. And it was, it's a feel good thing. It really is. And that's what cops want to do. Cops want to feel good. They want to help people. They don't want to hurt anybody, but you need that communication.
I understand. Actually, I taught at Yeshiva University, which is up there also, Washington Heights in the 180s. So I was there when the cops were walking around as well.
Yeah.
Where were you born and raised? You were a New York kid, right?
Well, I was born and raised in Rockland County. I spent my summers with my grandfather in Flatbush, Brooklyn, believe it or not. My mother is from the Bronx. My father was from Brooklyn. So I had a feel of New York City. My wife's from New York City, Washington Heights.
Right. If I may, was there other people in your family that were police officers? Or?
Oh, my family goes back to police officers to 1920. My Uncle Bill walked the beat in Harlem. My Uncle Charlie, my Uncle Fred were homicide detectives. My brother Charlie was a homicide detective. My brother Ernie was a lieutenant, and he was in internal affairs for a little while.
Okay. Well, now, I want to be very clear about this. The 33 officers that you referred to, these were charges, robbery, extortion, civil rights conspiracy. Assault. Were they cleared of all of these? What happened to them?
No, most of them did time. I think
Did time.
Don't quote me, even though I'm talking to you. I think at least 25 of the 33 did time. They did time, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. They tarnished the badge. You don't do that.
So when you watched the Crime and Punishment documentary, where there was wholesale avoidance of what was going on out there on the streets, as cops were giving all kinds of summons and so on, that didn't ring true to what was going on in the early 90s, did it?
No. And again, I'm watching the show, and I'm hoping everything's true, based on fact and everything else, and it looks like it was. I mean, but I'm not doing the investigation and looking at all this paperwork and everything else. But I remember sitting down with a couple of retired sergeants and cops, and some were pre-CompStat. One or two, I think, retired, let's say 2000, 2001, 2002. And we all said the same thing. When I was watching NYPD 12, from them saying, again, a quota where you have to give the X amount of C summonses out, you have to find a C summons. You have to be in a neighborhood or a precinct that has, C violations. And what was the second part of that question?
Did it ring true to what you were going through yourself in the early 90s? You weren't under the sort of pressure. I mean, in other words, the documentary really portrayed the great majority of police officers going along with the political directives to satisfy the quotas. I mean,
Right.
It's not written down, and these are the rogue cops when you refer to
And again,
these are rogue cops who are blowing the whistle on this.
yeah, and again, I think, going back to my conversation, with my friends talking about CompStat, and it was brought up in NYPD 12, whereas once you turn the NYPD into a business and a numbers game,
Yeah.
you can't do that. You're not in the business of giving numbers.
Yeah.
If there's enough bad guys out there to give, a parking tickets to, or movers, I never looked at my job as, I'm going to give out X amount of tickets today. My job is to see what's going out in the street, help people. And then even before I went to the 3.0, I worked in a 3.4, and the veterans would tell us to get out of the car, talk to the people, play with the kids. I was in my early 20s, so we would play. As long as the radio isn't going, we'll play hoops, we'll play a football game, throw the ball around. So you knew what was going on. That was what policing was all about. Once you turn into a business, And I think that's where the difference is, and again, I can't say what's going on in the streets in policing in New York City today because I'm so far removed from it. But I hope that they find a way or an avenue to have a conversation with the community again and bring real community policing back to New York City. Because if they do, and they do it the right way, you can't say, oh, we have community policing and you have a couple of youth programs. That doesn't work. It really doesn't work. You got to, again, get out in the street, walk the beat, and know who everybody is. And eventually, once they get to see your face enough times and you help and talk and everything else, then they're going to start trusting you. It's not going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight with me. It took, and I got a couple of years. But, it can be done.
Great point. Just 2 or 3 things occurred to me. I know Manny has been out in LA just recently, and he remarked with the degree of homelessness on the streets and so on. He observed, again, this is not some sort of scientific survey here, but he did observe, again, the police aren't out in the streets there. They're driving around, they're in their patrol cars and so on. Does that raise the point of perhaps have we too much counted on data, or have we gone overboard on the CompStat type of analysis? And the third part I wanted to sort of also bring in here is the diversity of the street patrol. New York's police department, the NYPD, has become much more diverse in terms of ethnicity and racial makeup. How was it back in the early 90s?
Oh, early 90s, you probably still had more whites than minorities. But my team, my CPU team, all fantastic officers, all fantastic. We had a mix of, I would say 33% African-American, 33% Hispanic, 33% whites. We were mixed probably 40-60 or maybe 30-70s between females and males. But I never looked at them as diversified. Not to sound corny, but we were all blue, and we spoke and we had respect for each other. And that's the other thing with community policing too that people don't understand. We were proactive, so we would, at roll calls, we would sit down and start talking about, okay, what's going on in your beat? How can we help? Who's making complaints? What's going on? And we'll devise a plan. I don't know if you read the book about and read about the bus scene.
I did, yeah.
You did. And that was so true. And what people don't know, I found out this afterwards. I spoke to this fantastic female detective, and she was in internal affairs. And I just spoke to her, oh my God, 2-3 months ago. And she called me up and she goes, Leo, she goes, oh my God. She goes, I was working internal affairs, which I didn't know. And she goes, internal affairs was watching that whole bus scene, and you're an urban legend. And I'm like, what? I was like, okay, thank you very much. But we can't do that if we're not community policing. You can't come up with, devise a plan to do certain situations to help, again, the community or person in the community. And the other question too, I got to go back to LAPD. I've met a few of the LAPD. They're fantastic people. But people also have to, you have to go out and walk the beat. And they have to figure out where they're going to walk a beat, because people have to realize that they only have 6,000, 8,000 police. I'm not sure what the number is, but they also cover 50 square miles.
Yeah.
It's not like New York City. Right. So I'm not an expert in LAPD. I think they're fantastic officers, as most officers are. But they have to devise a plan on how,
right.
But I don't know what the problems are either, to be honest.
Here's a tough question, perhaps. You can't deny that the drug war took a whole lot of people off the streets. Mm-hmm. And we became, 2.5 million people were put behind bars in the 70s, 80s, through the 90s. Mm-hmm. So what do you think that had an impact on the community itself? that you were trying to service when you take so many of the young males, fathers, the brothers, off the streets in terms of how does that maintain any sort of family unity and so on? So did we go too far in some of these policies? And the other thing that occurred to me is, do you have resistance also from police officers who say who are anti-community policing? That's we're too coddling of the community. We need to get tough, and do you get some of that also as well? From
Well,
the community.
That's two questions. You went two separate.
Very separate. Yeah.
I'll answer your second question first, and then I'll go back to your first question that I think you said was tough. The second question was, the only officers that gave me a hard time were the ones that were arrested. And that's only because we outperformed them. The community loved us. We got many awards. They didn't. So they started this term called chicken police on patrol. You know? So yeah, they would say things and everything else, but you know what? Who cares? I'm taking my guys out. We're going to go do a good job. We're going to have a good day. We're going to have fun. We're going to work with the community and smile. And then we're going to get recognized again. And what are you going to do? You know, eventually you're going to get locked up, you know? So, you know, There you go. But if and again, I'm going back, any police officer, when they go into the academy, they want to help the community. They want to walk the beat. They want to do things. They're not going to, I don't think any New York City police officer is going to say, oh, you walk in the beat, you're not doing your job. Well, the beat officer's, he's moving people, he's talking to people. If somebody doesn't belong there, he makes sure they're not there. If you have a molester or a pedophile, he's going to know about it. Or if somebody's scared, they're going to know about it. That's real policing, Now, going back to your first question, talking about, all the arrests and youths and everybody and everything else and all the people being arrested back in the 80s and 90s. You asked an interesting question to the police officers and on NYPD 12. And the question was, do the mayors set policy? Are they the ones, with every mayor, is there a different policy change? And the way it works, yes, they have a platform. They run on a platform. Now, when they come into office, they get a police commissioner who's a civilian, and then he goes down to the chief of department, inspectors, blah, 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 and then funnels down to all the police officers. Now, they get what the mayor wants, and they're soldiers, and they go out and do their job, whatever that mayor wants them to do. So they're just following the rules and the laws at that time. Do I personally think, looking back?
I was going to ask you personally, what did you think about that policy at a gut level? At a Gotcha.
And that thing is, okay, let's come together, community. Let's change the economics. For instance, if you want to fund some money from the police, for whatever reason, they still have to do their job. But if you want to put into an economic, but do it with all the agencies, or maybe raise taxes a little bit, which nobody wants to hear about, just to give people a chance. When I walked into these neighborhoods, when I worked in the 3-4 and, the 3-2 and the 3-0, my God, you feel for these people, so again, that's why you do your best job. I always did my job because I always thought of my grandmother, and my nephews and nieces, and, how would you want them to be treated? And that's, and most police officers will go out and do that, but you can't be there 24 hours a day. But there needs to be a change, and it should have started a long time ago. And you have to reform everything, economics, politics, everybody, all the experts got to get together and come up with a decision what are we going to do? Let's not just make this politics. Okay, how are we going to make it stronger? How are we going to feed? Going back to NYPD 12 again, I remember the one detective, he had the dreadlocks, and he was telling a story how he was going to school and he was so happy about coming home on Saturday. And then he was sad because he didn't have school lunches. So he really didn't eat over the weekend. And my heart went out to him because I was like, this is a real cop. He knows what it feels like to be a cop. He's going to know how to relate to community, and that's what, I think every cop aspires to be. And I know I did.
I feel that as you're talking, and I think you're right, that particular individual in the documentary stuck it out and persevered.
Mm-hmm.
In the remaining moments we have, can you get a little more specific about the community policing projects that you were specifically involved in? How you specifically try to help the community, help direct people to various other social agencies, housing, welfare, schools, employment, and do you see then your role as not just enforcing the law, as sort of police officer, social worker, if you will? Is that an adequate way of representing your living?
Very fair point. Very fair point. If people had we had such a strong, especially towards the end, we had such a strong community, and we had such a fantastic relationship with Community Board 9, which is based down on 125th Street. And if people had a problem, with apartments, housing, food, or, other social issues, we could, direct them directly down to Community Board 9, or I would make a personal phone call to the director down there, who was a fantastic gentleman. And he, at the time, he was probably 80 years old plus, and he ran circles around me when it came to community policing. We had a safe corridor program, which is fantastic, which was also, we worked hand in hand with Community Board 9, where, you would have the residents know that at a certain time of day, there's beat officers out in the street, and they could go to the bank, they could go to the post office, they could go to the grocery store. Mm-hmm. And I remember this one time, and we had this, chase with a man with a gun, and guy ends up running into this apartment, and we chase him. And as I'm running into the apartment after this gentleman, I look to my right and I see this young girl, elementary school, and then I see this father, and we chase the guy into the bathroom, we lock him up, blah, blah, blah. And as I'm walking out, I'm like, something, it's not right here. I mean, I don't know what it is, but we walk the guy down, he gets arrested, blah, blah. I walk back upstairs, the door's broken, and, I knock on the door, and, I tell the father, not to be rude or anything. I said, but, something's not right here. I said, there's no pictures on the wall. There's no, this or that. You look like a businessman. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, and it was a very, very bad drug apartment. I mean, drug building. I mean, it's probably one of the worst that were in a 3-0. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah. He goes, we had a fire down in an apartment down 100th Street, or one of those streets down in the 2-4. And, so they put us up here until, they fix up the apartment. So I'm looking at the young girl, and my gosh, elementary, and she looks so cute, and she's doing her homework. And I said, well, do me a favor. I said, I'm going to give you a phone number for the director of Community Board 9. I'm going to give him a call also. I'll see if they could do something for you to, find you another location. And he goes, okay. And that director got him an apartment, somewhere where he used to live. So the girl was closer to his school and everything else. And it made me feel good. That's policing. That's community policing. And there's many stories like that. Yeah.
And that's in your book too, which we highly recommend.
Oh, I forgot about that.
No, we can't forget about that. I wanted to, before we make sure we mentioned that one, the terrific book again. what, as you describe this example here, what do you think about the police being put in schools in uniform, elementary schools? Do you think it's a proper role for them?
Well, we did it back in the early 90s, and everybody loved the youth officer. I mean, the whole thing is you got to start somewhere. And I don't know the culture of New York City. I only hear what some people say, and all this other crazy stuff that's going on. And is it because they don't trust the police, and the parents are saying don't trust the police, and now you have a cop walking through the halls, and oh my God, now the kids are like scared because the cop's walking in, which that didn't happen in the early 90s. Everybody knew the youth officer, which was a separate and apart from community policing, but he probably should have been community policing. He would walk into the schools, talk to the teachers, talk to the kids on the playground. Everybody loved them. They would do youth projects together. I mean,
it's a difference. Have you been back recently to the?
I was actually back finally after 19 months to visit my mother and have graduation parties in New York City. But I'm not in station houses or precincts or working with cops. So I mean, I maybe I mistook your question. Maybe you meant something else about that question, or
no. You answered great, and again, I really want to make sure that our audience understands too that this is a fabulous book. This is really necessary. We don't hear enough voices from the police community itself, and I think you've tried to be fair about it, and it's very articulate. It's really an interesting book, and gosh, we've got only a minute or two left. I just want to ask you: is there is there a family member that will carry on the police tradition? Another Sergeant Lungaro, perhaps.
I have one cousin on the police department, and I have another cousin that's going to be entering the police academy. And hopefully, they know me. They know me well. They know my stories. Again, it starts at the top. And I hope whoever the next mayor is brings somebody in who really wants to do community policing the right way.
Well, we are going to have an ex-police officer as mayor. So
Eric Adams, right? Eric Adams?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I met him in the early 90s. We're both sergeants. I mean, it was just a passing conversation. It seemed like a decent guy, you know. And plus he knows policing.
So he grew up in that older school, and perhaps
I would say so. Say so. I mean, I don't know him that well. I've heard certain things, and being a former police officer and not liking certain things, I think he'll do a good job.
Well, fingers crossed. We certainly would hope for that as well. And Leo, thank you so very, very much. It's a terrific book.
Mm-hmm.
It really sells well. It needs to be out there, and I'm so glad that you took the opportunity to talk a little about it on the show. And I just thank you so very, very much for your commentary and your.
Can I tell the
3-0
your audience one time, if they want information on the 3-0, all they have to do is type in the 3-0, and then my last name, Lungaro, Lungaro, and all my blogs and websites and all the Amazons and Barnes and Nobles will pop up.
Terrific. Thank you again so very, very much, Leo.
Thank you, Jim. It was fantastic.
Pleasure and honor. It really has.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for clarifying so many things, and we wish you the best.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Give me a call.
We will. I might put you in touch with Manny. How about that?
Manny seemed very interesting. I liked him.
He's a character. I think you guys will get along very well.
I'm sure.
Thank you so much again, and thank you so very much to all of us, to all of you out there in our audience, and we'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination. Take care.
The department says there are no quotas.
Well, I can tell you there are quotas in the NYPD.
Truly explosive allegations.
They're coming from police officers who are part of what's being called the NYPD 12, who filed a class action lawsuit in federal court.
This is not just another lawsuit. 12 cops willing to step up like this, because you're not going to get this again for 100 years.
Hold it for one quick second. Now, to record.
From the beginning, I saw how this job was. It was not about helping people, it's about numbers.
Who's targeted most? The minority community.
Boom. And all this got dismissed.
All this got dismissed.
Once you start getting arrested, it goes in your record. They taking away jobs that they could be future lawyers, future cops.
Supervisors that are using police officers as a revenue-producing agent for the city.
This system has to change.
We all put our jobs on the line. We put everything on the line.
This is something that was placed on my desk.
You're still a police officer. And there are people in our community that don't work with police officers, period.
This is David versus Goliath. Without public support, we're nothing.
How long do you think you're going to keep the powder keg hat on?
I believe in struggle, and with struggle comes change.
Can the NYPD be what cops are supposed to be?